My name's Nigel Hawthorn. This presentation was 16 by 9. It's now squashed to 4 by 3. I hope it will all work and the fonts will look fine. You can all have copies of the slides. Nothing here, as far as I'm concerned, is private. You can take photos if you like, but you don't have to. No problem. I have a presentation style that often gives you more questions than answers. That's a shame, isn't it? But I don't typically go through, here's my product, here's what comes out on version 6.3.2. But what I'd like to do is give you thoughts and ideas of what we may all have forgotten about computing and keeping it secure, especially as we move to the cloud. And I'll try not to tell you off, though I did have someone who told me, I think I've just been told off by Nigel for 35 minutes. So you may think some of these slides aren't necessarily for you, and that's absolutely fine. Maybe there'll be someone else in your organisation that you can share them with afterwards. Because I think this area is quite fascinating, and actually it's often difficult for IT security people to really decide what policies they want to implement, because actually it's down to governance, risk, compliance, lines of business, document owners, and actually they don't know what they want either. So with a bit of luck, some of these slides will be useful for you in the future to share with your colleagues and try to work out what you need to do. I and my colleague Dave, who's still downstairs, are here all day, so feel free to come and find us, ask us any questions. Otherwise, my contact details are here. Now, like everybody, I've got too many slides, so that's perhaps the longest introduction. Oh, wrong one. Shall we use the one that works? Always helps. Hopefully, many of you have seen this, have you? The cloud shared responsibility model. There's a couple of great blogs, one from Amazon, AWS, and one from Microsoft, that talk about the shared responsibility model and remind you that if cloud is done correctly, that it can be nice and secure, and that their responsibility is down the bottom with things like power, connectivity to the internet, keeping the servers up, load balancing, operating system, patching, etc. At the top, it's your responsibility. So which users get access, what they can do with it. You can't just say, I'm sending it off to the cloud, I trust Microsoft, it's all secure. I would actually say that this is probably in need of improvement, because even though it talks about 2 different areas, I actually think there's probably 4 different areas, and you'll see this in some of the presentation, that there's stuff that is absolutely the responsibility of the cloud service provider. Then there's features the cloud service provider has, but you need to turn them on. We'll come to Amazon S3 buckets a bit later on. There's bits that are your responsibility as a company, for example, maybe defining a document as being secret based on what its content is. That's definitely the responsibility of the company, not the responsibility of the cloud service provider. But then there's the responsibility at the top of the users, the individuals. The individual who says, oh, I'm going to put some documents on Office 365 and then I'm going to share them with some external person. That's really the user's responsibility, though as an employer you probably need to train them, advise them, coach them, explain to them the possible dangers of getting it wrong. So I think even this is perhaps a bit simplistic. But let's assume that we understand that there's some responsibilities that are ours as organizations, there's some responsibilities that are the cloud service provider. Then feel free, come in, sit down, anywhere you like. And what I'm going to do is remind us that there are some huge costs of getting it wrong. This story, I think, is good for 2 reasons. One is the amount of money involved. 2 is the amount of time between a data loss incident and the actual costs. So if you don't remember, when Yahoo was purchased by Verizon, the price that Verizon paid went down by $350 million in the last few weeks before the deal was finished, because of a data loss incident that had occurred 2 years previously. So we're all sitting here. If there's a data loss incident happening in your organizations now, it might materially affect something that you haven't even thought about in 2 years' time. We've got to take this seriously. This is real money. There are lots of other examples we could use. Who had their data lost by British Airways last year? Yes? Yep. I phoned and got a new credit card. Thanks very much. I just remembered the number and I had to go and change it. Who had their data lost by Marriott last year? Yeah, just me? Okay. You know, it's annoying. We've got to work out this is happening all the time. And if it's us that are headline news, then perhaps we all get fired, or perhaps our organisation loses lots of money because of it. But I don't necessarily want to just concentrate on the bad. I'm sure that we've all got lots of examples of this ourselves. What I do want to do, though, is share with you some statistics, some information. And McAfee publish a couple of surveys. One of them usually comes out about April, so we're working on the new one now. This is response to a worldwide survey of, I think, about 400 different IT managers. It's their opinion. Sorry, it's blue on black. That's not good. But anyway, it's called Navigating the Cloudy Sky. And I think it's about 30 pages of statistics. Then there's another one that we published in October, which is real-life data. I always find that somebody tells me 62% of something is something doesn't mean much. But if they say, well, it was 30%, it's now 62, or it's this in one country or this in another, that's interesting. And for these two reports, there's one question that was asked in both reports. And that question was, how many cloud services do you have in use in your organization? Now, we could spend the next 30 minutes all going around thinking of numbers, but actually we've been asking this same question for quite a long time, and the survey says an average of 32. So I don't know if you think in your organization you're using 32 services. That's 32 different services. So if all of us here were using Dropbox, that's only one as far as this count is concerned. So the survey was 32, but the real life data, in fact, is 1,945. Wow. So if we know the 32 that are considered to be low risk, considered to be acceptable, and then there's a few that we'd consider to be high risk, we never want our data going there. The big problem is the grey area in the middle. Is this okay? Is this not okay? So often the first thing people ask us when they talk about cloud security is, please give me a list of everything that's going on. And I'll tell you that actually the biggest number I've ever seen was a UK bank, highly regulated, 6,000 different services in use over a 1-month period. That's a lot of services to then try to work out, is this okay? What's going there? What are they doing? And if you still think some of these numbers are astonishing and you really don't believe it, in my own life, I use Marketo, Salesforce, Box, Dropbox, Office 365, Concur, Workday. You know, very quickly I've got to 7. Those are the corporate supported ones, though actually one of them is not. Then you get people doing PDF conversions. Oh, look, I've got a PDF file. I'll just send it up here. They'll then convert it to a Word file. They'll send it back. What did you do? You just sent an internal document to someone you've never heard of. Is that okay? Maybe it is. Depends what it has in it. Okay, so lots of people ask, what are you most concerned about? I think this list comes from IDC. I just wanted to point out a couple of things that hit me. Firstly, multiple clouds. I mean, whether you've got 1,000 or not, we've got to realize that if you try to address security in each cloud one by one, you'll be there forever. If you can try to find something that will address the problems in lots of cloud services, you're obviously much further ahead. And then the other thing is well-intentioned employee error. And, you know, events like this, probably 90% of people are focusing on bad actors, hackers, malware, the external threats. But actually, if you look at the ICO report, they didn't say the same thing last year for 2018, but for 2017, they said that more than 95% of the data loss incidents that they knew about were simply employees trying to get their job done. And that's a problem. Let's skip over this one, don't have the time. Some of you may already be partway through your cloud security policies. A show of hands, not going to ask anyone to speak. Anyone here block Dropbox, for instance? Yeah, okay, ooh, 25%. Okay, if you block Dropbox, that's hopefully because someone internally has made the decision that you don't trust Dropbox. One of the best things to use Dropbox for is to share data. But there are other ways to share data, of course. Email, we've been using that for a long time. Let's ask another question. Anyone got a policy here that stops email attachments over a certain size? 5 meg, 10 meg, 25 meg? Yeah. Okay. Anybody like to say why? This is my chance to have a drink. Good, isn't it? Because everybody else does. Wow. If I jumped off a cliff, I think it's actually because everyone else did. Everyone else has. This policy has been around for years. When the policy was set up, bandwidth was expensive, storage was expensive. Actually, email wasn't that great if it had a big attachment. Yeah? When cars were invented, somebody walked in front with a flag. We don't do that anymore. Why is this policy there? If there's only one thing you take away from this, maybe it's go back, speak to your email people, and work out why it's there. Because if you're blocking large attachments on Outlook, if you're blocking Dropbox, what have you just asked your users to do? Not send files? Yeah, try that one. What you've just asked them to do is go to Google and type in file bulk upload, and they'll end up here. Zippy Share. Anybody here blocked Zippy Share? Anybody here heard of Zippy Share? Well done. Dropbox is a well-run, they have enterprise products, secure service. Some of you said you blocked it. You've just sent your users to this place, which has no data encryption at rest, allows anonymous use, doesn't support multi-factor authentication, has no penetration testing, and actually we don't even know where it is. I'd much rather my data's going through Dropbox, thank you very much. Or better than that, let's put it through our email system where everything's logged. You can put in DLP. It's an existing secure system. So we do need to think whether or not in today's world we've got the policies that make sense. And just to let you know, this presentation's 50 meg. Anyone like to guess whether it will get through your system or not if I was to send it as an email attachment? It bounces back a lot. Okay, so you thought you'd be told off, didn't you? The good news is we can address some of these things, and after dark blue on black, we now have light blue on white, which is perhaps even better. We can help you with some of these questions. We keep attributes of different service providers. For instance, currently, of the 25,000 or so different cloud services we know about, just over 9% of them encrypt data at rest. If you want to make a policy decision that I will only use cloud services that encrypt data at rest, happily, you can start reducing the number of services that you use based on that sort of parameter. Some of them allow you to encrypt data with your own keys. You may want to do that, especially for very confidential data. And again, that shrinks down the number of services that you might want to use. So the good news is, there are ways to try to make these cloud services more secure. But what we're finding is that some of our customers allowed us to look inside their data on Office 365 and try to categorize the files by the data that we found in it. And we find about a third of content on cloud services is sensitive in some way or other. Confidential information from the company, or perhaps personal confidential information, health information, financial information, etc. And also, as cloud is being used more, we're seeing over time that more files are being shared more often by more people. People are finding that this is a good way of working. And let's remember the reason cloud's successful is that actually there's some great applications really easy to use for the user, and therefore they will gravitate to them. Who do we share it with? Now, this is actually a bit naughty because there's a big amount which is internal sharing, but if we look at the email addresses or the email domains that people share data with through cloud services, we find a lot of them great are business partners, but some of them are personal email addresses at Gmail, at Yahoo, whatever, and some people will create a file, put it in the cloud service, and then say, I want a shared link that I can email to anyone and allow anyone to pick it up. Now, in fact, that's how I work with this presentation. If any of you want a copy of it, I'll send you a box link that anyone can take. But that's because I feel there's nothing confidential in here that I wouldn't want shared. But, of course, it then comes into who's the user, what are they doing, who are they sharing it with, is that okay? One of our customers in Switzerland, a bank, has actually said, I'm going to work on a whitelist basis. They've got a whitelist of something like 75 different co-respondent banks, and any of their employees who share information to the cloud with those, that's automatically okay, and by default everything else is not. Some people find that a bit tough because you've then got to keep a whitelist up to date, and employees are always annoyed that their particular vendor or supplier isn't in that list. But that's the way they've chosen to do these things, and all of this is possible for you. You've got to think, what do you want? What do you need? How can you define a policy that makes sense for your business? Here's a little example. Don't look at LinkedIn. I used to work for a company that I don't work for anymore. And that company had BYOD technology, so I had my own laptop. And they used a webinar system that wasn't the most famous webinar system in the world from Cisco, but was something else. I left the company. Something like 6 months later, somebody asked me to join a webinar that was run by that same organization. And my laptop said to me, would you like to log in with your existing credentials? Guess what I did? Yes, I said. I got into my previous employer's webinar system, could have downloaded all the people that had been to their webinars, could have deleted all their future webinars. Why? Because honestly, it was set up by someone in marketing who hadn't asked IT security, hey, it's just an online webinar system. Why should I go through this process? So actually, unfortunately, back to employees doing the wrong thing, you probably need to go back and work out what services are your different departments using, and frankly, it's often marketing that is the place that goes new, shiny, oh, I'll use this, without necessarily thinking about the downsides. The good news is that actually some cloud services integrate with enterprise identity systems, multi-factor authentication, and you can then, feel free guys to come in and sit down if you like, you can then make sure that if a person leaves the organization, you remove them from all the different cloud services at once. I mean, I listed at the beginning 7 different services that I know I use. If I was to leave the company tomorrow, I know that with the press of one button, McAfee can remove my access to all of them in one go. You want to do that and not leave some of them potentially open. I put this slide in to remind myself as much as you that actually it's very easy with these examples to keep using SaaS services, but actually the biggest growth we're seeing now is in IaaS. It's AWS especially, but Azure and the Google Cloud Service as well. Internal developers quite often developing applications either for external or internal use. And sadly, they can get things wrong as well. Here's an example from February last year where FedEx lost data that was stored on an Amazon cloud using S3 buckets and no password. And the same week, Tesla lost information, again, on Amazon's AWS service. But in neither of these cases was it Amazon's fault. The systems weren't set up correctly by the customer, and data was left exposed. And even though my drawing's not very good, I think the quote makes sense. Organizations are obliged to monitor their infrastructure for risky configurations, etc. It is your fault if data goes out of an Amazon bucket because your development engineers didn't bother setting it up correctly. I don't know if this is anybody's laptop, but I used my sister-in-law's laptop a few months ago, and I logged in with my correct credentials. We had multi-factor authentication, so I used my phone to do the additional factor. But I was using a device that McAfee knew nothing about. You can, with cloud services, say, that's not okay. You can also, if you like, say, okay, I'll take a halfway house. I'll allow the user to log in, but I won't allow them to download anything. So some of these features are already there. Some of them, they need to be turned on. Some of them you can only get by buying additional systems such as cloud access security brokers, but they are all available. And if you look at the cloud, you can realize that it can be as secure as your on-premise systems, perhaps even more secure. Here's Bart, bless him. I will not share my password. If somebody logs in, well, let's actually, it's all about me. Let's use me as an example. So I've worked for the company for nearly 5 years. In that time, I've probably been to 20 countries. I've used one type of phone, one type of laptop. I've never been to Asia in the last 5 years. If I was all of a sudden to try to log in from an Android device in Beijing, that's two odd bits of behavior at the same time. We have the capability to say, hang on, even though this is using, I don't know, Office 365 or Salesforce, this is unusual behavior. And just like your credit card, companies can say, hang on, strange stuff going on. We can then block that. But again, you've got to turn it on. You've got to work out what's normal, what isn't. The good news is that there are systems now that will allow you to map what's usual behavior for each user. So I will have a completely different profile from the person with the same job who's based in APAC. Oh, here's a good one. Anyone here use Salesforce? Anyone here think Salesforce's reporting system is excellent? No. Okay, so it's okay, but the graphs aren't particularly pretty. It's a bit clunky. Did you know there's lots of plugins for Salesforce? Here's one, CommerceWorks. CommerceWorks will take your Salesforce data and they'll create better reporting for you. And they've got a 30-day free trial, Nigel. All you need to do is tell me your Salesforce credentials. I'll go to Salesforce, pick up all of your data, and then I'll create you your reports. Sorry, what did you just say? So here we have cloud-to-cloud traffic created by a user, going nowhere near your infrastructure, and probably, users being what they are, not asking IT security if it's okay. So we need to now look at, well, do we allow Salesforce plugins? Do we disallow them? Do we want them to tell us every time a new one starts? Do we want the ability to make decisions on the fly based on what's going on? You see, you didn't know you were going to come to more questions than answers. These are all answerable, but they're things we need to think about. Here's my last one, I think. Who here has heard of Prezi? Oh, yes. If you haven't or you're unsure, have you seen a presentation that's really just one big image and it zooms in over here and it zooms out and it zooms in over here and it turns you upside down and zooms in here and you feel a bit sick? Yeah, that's Prezi. Their website does not say, make your audience feel sick. But if you've seen Prezi or used Prezi, then of course we've all read the end user license agreement, haven't we? Shall we read it together? Shall we read just a very, very little piece of it? And here we go. You will give to Prezi a worldwide, non-exclusive, revocable, royalty-free, fully paid, sub-licensable, transferable license to use, host, store, reproduce, modify, create derivative works, communicate, publish, perform, display, distribute, and transmit the content. You allow third parties to search it, that's Google, and we can keep a backup forever. Whose data is it? Is Prezi okay? Ooh. Is Prezi not okay? It depends. If it's this presentation, I don't care. You can all have it. Really doesn't matter. If it's your internal confidential plans, obviously not. Anybody here paid for Prezi? See the raft of hands going up. If you pay for Prezi, you get a button that says keep my data private. Is Prezi okay? Wow, this is really hard stuff, isn't it? So from an IT security point of view, we've got to decide what our policies are, communicate them to the users, and try to enforce them. And Prezi's a great example in my view because it really is in that grey area of is it secure, is it not secure? Well, it depends. It depends on who's doing what the content is, who they're sharing it with, etc. We need to help our users make the right decisions, but we need to also be able to help them make it for them. I'm not sure I've got time to talk about TalkTalk. Anybody here from TalkTalk? Last week there was somebody from TalkTalk and she said, oh, I'd like to see a copy of that. But just for 1 minute, I guess, one of their 3 data loss incidents, great, love them. I used to be a customer. No. They lost 157,000 customer records. Strangely, they claim exactly 10% of them had banking information. I find that difficult to believe. They lost 250,000 retail customers, including me, over the following 9 months. They recovered some of those through OEM deals, lower margin. Market share dropped by 4%. Stock price fell by 11%. Revenue dropped, because they had to make it public, revenue dropped by £80 million, etc., etc. The regulator fine was only 400,000, though I think there was 450 in the end. With GDPR, it could have been as much as £72 million. But my point is, in the long term, even that is not as much as the reputation loss that perhaps goes on forever. Now, I know I'm old. I will die one day. But I've managed to persuade my daughter not to do business with TalkTalk, and I'm perfectly happy with that. And I will not do business with them ever again. So we've got to think to ourselves that there's a lot more to this than just focusing on the fines. And a lot of people with GDPR have focused on the fines. I think that's wrong. Really, it's telling us to do the right thing and reminding us that if we get it wrong, there's a long tail of possible outcomes. So Gartner say that the vast majority of cloud security failures will be the customer's fault. I think I've tried to make that clear. And the 3 things I think to remember is that a lot now of data may be created natively in the cloud. If you've seen Google's apps, for instance, you can all work on a document together that never actually lives anywhere but the cloud. A lot of data is cloud-to-cloud traffic. How are we going to manage that? You can't do that with a device sitting on the network. And with remote users, mobile devices, a lot of things are not going through your corporate network. So if a lot of your defense is based on devices sitting in your infrastructure, for the cloud world, you've got to realize that there's more things you need to do. And skipping over the sales bit, I just wanted to show this one really, which is that to be able to make the appropriate decision, you need to look at multiple factors at the same time. It's not as simple as saying, this is always bad, this is always good. If we know the user, the context, the content, we can start making those intelligent questions. And the sort of technologies that we need, if I look at all of my examples, is, we need visibility, we need the ability to block for things like Zippy Share. We need to look at user behavior, maybe coach the users. So with Dropbox, for instance, maybe those of you that block Dropbox, you've got a contract with Microsoft for OneDrive. Instead of blocking it, how about you intercept the requests in their browser each time and say, actually, this is not the corporate standard, this is why. We'd rather you use OneDrive, which we've got a contract for, it's unlimited, it's backed up, The organization can keep you safe as an individual. But if you really have to use Dropbox because you're working with a third party who insists that you have to use Dropbox, click here to continue. You know, those sorts of things can help advise and coach users to do the right thing. You know, you do need to look at what other services are being used by which lines of business. I think we went into a customer about a year ago and found that they had 12 different HR systems, or 12 different HR cloud systems, and they had no idea. But different departments, different groups, different countries were all using different systems. And they actually said, well, you know what, this is a good thing from a finance and a purchasing point of view. Let's consolidate so that we can save money. We actually find as well, a lot of people are paying for contracts that they're not using. Sky High Networks got acquired by McAfee a year ago, and we realized the amount of licenses that we were paying for services where employees had left. Free money going out to cloud service providers because nobody was really taking track of it. Is this being recorded? I didn't say that. DLP is a technology that I think has had a bad rap for the last 15, 20 years, but actually can now be really smart. You can fingerprint files, you can look for lots of Boolean logic, you can do things like, say, let's look at email addresses. A file with 3 email addresses in, possibly that's okay, because it might be, I don't know. In fact, I do invoices for my wife, so it's probably her email address, an info@ email address, maybe one more. So that's okay. 3 is fine. 5? I don't know. 10? 25 email addresses in the same document? You know, at what point in your organization is that considered to be a threat? And the good news is you can set these parameters in DLP nowadays at whatever level makes sense for you. So you can try to implement policies that are flexible and not too onerous, and don't say, well, no emails can ever go out with email addresses in. Believe me, I've seen it. Okay, so here's a list of 8 or so different capabilities I think you need to look at to be able to secure cloud computing. And I'll finish by saying, as I said right at the beginning, very happy to share these presentation slides with you. I hope you found it interesting to at least ask yourself some questions. Of course, if you want to know some of the answers, come down and find Dave or myself downstairs, and we can tell you how you can address all of these. They are all addressable. But I'm not a salesperson. I would say before buying anything, you actually need to work out inside your organization, where do you want to go? And this really is a time when governance, risk, compliance, legal, lines of business, and IT will really need to come together. You can't just buy some shiny piece of software and say, my security is dealt with. Okay, hope that was interesting, useful, some food for thought. Go back and look at why on earth you are blocking emails above a certain size. Thank you.
Thank you.